Well, growing up, I went to 5 different high schools. So I went through the whole educational system in Victoria. I went to a state school, a state selective school, a private school, a Catholic school, a co-educational school, and quite a few all-girls schools. So in each one of the schools, I was the outsider. So my main character in Laurinda, Lucy, is an outsider herself. And some of it's drawn on my own school experiences, though the school, Laurinda itself, is completely fictional. Oh, well, when I created Lucy, I put her specifically in a private school where a particular type of teenage girl is created. You know, the high achieving, debating, musical instrument playing, future leader sort of girl. And Lucy is what maybe psychologists would call a classic introvert. So she doesn't talk very much and she watches and listens. And yet she still manages to forge her own path at the school, and more importantly, she manages to stand up to this institution called the cabinet. Now, she didn't do it by charging into the school as an outsider and, you know, asserting herself, because that would be really unrealistic. Every time I went to a new school, I had to sit back and figure out where I fitted in. She did it in her own way. So I guess many young adults who are not as extroverted would be able to relate to Lucy. Well, with the members of the cabinet, I wanted them to not be two-dimensional villains. I wanted them to be girls with backstories and with families that have helped shape the way they are. So Amber Leslie's mother and grandmother, and you know, back since time memorial, her family have gone to Laurinda, this august institution, and she's one of these girls that are brought up to, you know, be very aware of other races and other cultures. But the difficulty is in an environment like Laurinda, it's all theoretical. So when she meets a girl like Lucy, the only questions she can ask Lucy are completely cultural ones. Where did you come from? Did you come from a boat? It sounds a little bit racist, but it's just out of ignorance. So I wanted to create these characters that were born into this sense of entitlement, that were unaware of it. So that's where Amber Leslie came from. So I set Laurinda in about 20 years ago, actually, in the mid-1990s, very specifically for 3 reasons. So the first reason is that when you write young adult, you have to get cultural references exactly right, and cultural references date so quickly. So if you put Justin Bieber in, or if you put One Direction, when it's out of vogue, your book is just a cultural book that's peppered with references. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to write something more you know, timeless. So that's why I didn't set it in the present day. The second thing is these girls have to confront the bullying face to face, sort of like old-fashioned soldiers, how they fought with bayonets instead of with drone warfare, which is what cyberbullying basically is. You can become anonymous. So that was the second reason. And the third reason is that I wanted the reader to get a sense of Lucy's outsider status, and her complete alienation and disconnect from the school. So if she had social media, she would be more connected, and she would probably not write as many letters. That's the reasons why. Oh, well, I wanted to set up 2 different situations that were in contrast with each other. So Lucy's family is very working class. She comes from a refugee boat background, and because her parents are not as educated as she is, you know, at the age of 15 she has more of an education than either her mum and dad. they give her adult responsibilities. So she translates letters, she goes for the, to the bank with her mum, she looks after her little brother, she does the shopping. So in all senses, except legally, Lucy is like an adult. She's 15. In other countries in the world, 15-year-olds are treated like adults. But on the other hand, you have the girls at Laurinda who are taught to be future leaders, who are trained in debating, who are trained in politics, who are trained in all areas of leadership, and yet they're like hothouse strawberries. So, they're in this glass environment, they're bright and lush and cultivated so carefully, but when you take them to the outside world, they bruise really easily. And the interplay there is that it's people like the girls in the cabinet who don't have that much life experience, who in 10 years' time end up making major policy decisions for people in the working class suburbs like Lucy. So that was what I wanted to set up. Well, I wanted to make Mrs. Gray a complex and realistic adult character. I didn't want her to be good or bad. She's in the teaching world, you have teachers who stay in the classroom, and then you have teachers who are very ambitious and become administrators, which is what Mrs. Gray has become. And so Mrs. Gray really wants to get ahead, wants to, step up each level of school government and reach a really high position. And in doing that, she's a bully herself. She is not a good person, and I didn't want to make her redeeming or anything at the end. She's a constant person because in real life, you meet work colleagues, you meet ambitious people like that can not only bully other teachers, but sort of squash other people to achieve their aims. So Mrs. Gray is the way she is. Oh, well, that sounds like a Mean Girls, Lindsay Lohan scenario. But I do remember when I was a teenager reading Aung San Suu Kyi's autobiography called Freedom from Fear. And that book had a big effect on how I thought about the world. And I think the very first paragraph was that she said power doesn't corrupt because in itself power is neutral. She said it's fear that corrupts. So it's fear of losing your power, or it's fear of people who have power. And you can see this dynamic play in the cabinet, the governing hierarchy of the school, and all the other students. So, we're always talking about leadership, but no one ever talks about how to be a follower, because it's all the followers that make the leaders. Without the followers, leaders have no power. Oh, well, my editor, Chris Fike, said I had to get it exactly right or we'd take out this narrative device. And he was right, because it was only there to develop Lucy's character. So when you read the book, you'll discover that Lynn is there to help Lucy discover herself. I really don't like books that, have a twist just for the sake of it. So if a twist adds to character development, I think it should be there, but otherwise it just, interrupts the flow of things. I thought of three main symbols. So the first symbol is, of course, the school blazer. And in fact, Laurinda had the working title of Blazers of Glory because it was very important that the blazer was part of it. And the reason for that was when I went to a private school, my school blazer, which was about $110 at that time, was the most expensive piece of clothing we had in the house, more so than any of my father's suits or any of my mother's jackets. And so there was such power vested in that blazer. If you walked down the streets of Footscray or Braybrook, went to stores in your blazer, no one would see you as a shoplifter. They'd offer you jobs, you know. And I realised what a potent symbol it was of a certain class and a certain character just by wearing that jacket. So the second symbol in Laurinda that I thought was quite important is the sewing machine, because Lucy's mother is an outworker. Now, a sewing machine is a very domestic item, and yet it's a very, you know, it's like seeing the third world in the first world. She doesn't do it for fun. She does it in a back garage where there are no windows. And, you know, you see a lot of clothes feature in Laurinda. The girls at Laurinda wear these designer clothes that Lucy's mother makes for minimum wage. So it's like two different worlds apart. And the third symbol, which is quite a nasty one, is the symbol of the tampon, which they use to torment a teacher because it, you know, I think it's very symbolic. All the girls bleed, and some do it more explicitly than others, you know. Some show it more explicitly than others. Well, I didn't want to write a novel based on themes because they always flop. If you start a young adult novel and think, I will write about war or I'll write about bullying, it never works. So the character had to come first, and the character was Lucy, and I really wanted Lucy to have a sense of humour that progressed during the book. So at the start, she's still quite funny and witty, but you notice it's a warm kind of humour towards her friends at Christ Our Saviour College. As the book progresses, the more intelligent or intellectual she becomes, the more cultural capital she gets. Her humour becomes darker, more sarcastic, you know, more biting. But it was so important to have that humour because without it, it would be a very bleak book. It would be about a girl who goes to a new school, leaves her old world behind, and doesn't find a place in this hierarchy of established places. And also some terrible things happen in the book, which the humour relieves as well. Well, students already talk enough about racial discrimination. So, you know, you have Harmony Day and you have books exploring multiculturalism. I wanted Laurinda to be more nuanced. So the character of Lucy, her race doesn't come first and foremost. Her class comes first. And you'll notice where she grew up in the suburb of Stanley, they don't hold back on their views. They think the migrants have come here to steal jobs and to get fancy cars from the government. So she grew up in quite an ignorant and racist neighbourhood. And again, that's due to fear. Those people fear losing their jobs. They've been on the dole. They fear strangers coming into their working class neighbourhood. On the other hand, you have these very intelligent, very, you know, charity-orientated liberal students at Laurinda whose casual racism comes out of ignorance. So they're well-meaning, but they ask Lucy the most inappropriate questions about her race and culture. And there is a big distinction between those two types of racism. That's a good question. I get asked that a lot. I never get asked that for my non-fiction books. I don't know whether it's because it's a YA book and YA books are meant to have a message, but it's an interesting question because I never set out to write with a theme or hammer a message in mind. I guess I set out to show students who usually, if you're a high school student, you stay in one or two high schools throughout your whole career, you know, your high school experience, but I went to 5 different schools and they were very different. The first one was in Footscray and it was 85% migrant kids who'd spent 3 months in an English language centre in year 7. So I had friends in year 7 who were 16 or 17 who'd grown up in camps. Then I went to a private school at the other end of, my high school experience, where you had girls who were driven everywhere. They weren't allowed to cross the road until they were a lot older. And I wanted students to see that your high school experience isn't the solitary one, that there are all these different worlds happening around you outside your suburbs. So I guess if it had any message, it was to widen that experience.